Raven Shaw had learned to read the storms. After 5 years in the wasteland, you either learned or you died. This one was different. The sickly green lightning that split the sky carried an artificial precision that made her skin crawl. She gunned the engine of her salvaged rover, racing against the approaching wall of radioactive clouds. The ruins of the old world rose around her like the bones of ancient creatures. Broken skyscrapers clawed at the poisoned sky, their windows long since shattered by the storms that regularly scoured the landscape. Raven's grip tightened on the steering wheel as she searched for shelter. Her supplies might be needed at the settlement, but they'd do no good if she died trying to deliver them. A flash of movement caught her eye, a figure stumbling through the debris, clearly disoriented. Raven cursed under her breath. The smart thing would be to keep driving. The wasteland had taught her that kindness often got you killed. But something about the stranger's desperate movements made her hesitate. "Damn it all," she muttered, spinning the wheel. The rover skidded to a stop near the figure, a woman in what had once been expensive clothing, now torn and stained. Her striking silver hair whipped in the growing wind, and on her wrist gleamed a device Raven had only seen in stories, a Dome Dweller's control bracelet. "Get in!" Raven shouted over the rising storm. "Unless you fancy being cooked from the inside out." The woman's eyes, an unnaturally bright violet, met Raven's for a moment before she scrambled into the rover. Raven floored the accelerator just as the first waves of radioactive rain began to fall, corroding everything they touched. "There's an old maintenance tunnel ahead," Raven said, not taking her eyes off the treacherous road. "We can wait out the storm there." She glanced at her passenger, who was shivering despite the heat. "I'm Raven. And you're a long way from the domes." "Talia," the woman replied after a moment's hesitation. "Talia. Vale. And yes, I suppose I am." Raven guided the rover into the relative safety of the tunnel just as the storm reached its full fury. The sound of caustic rain hammering against the concrete above them nearly drowned out her words. "Want to tell me what a Dome Dweller is doing out here in the wastes?" Talia's hands twisted in her lap. "I had to leave. I discovered something terrible. About the storms. About what's really causing them." "What do you mean, what's causing them?" Raven's voice sharpened. She'd lost too many friends to the mysterious storms that plague the wasteland. "They're not natural," Talia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're weapons. Created by the Dome leadership to control the wasteland population. To eliminate settlements they deem undesirable." She pulled up a holographic display from her bracelet, showing complex weather patterns and targeting systems. Raven's blood ran cold as she studied the data. All those deaths, all that destruction, it had been deliberate. Her hands clenched into fists. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because I need help," Talia met her gaze steadily. "Help to expose the truth. To stop them. And because..." She hesitated, "because you just risked your life to save a stranger. That means either you're very foolish, or you still believe in doing what's right." "I'm hoping it's the latter." A bitter laugh escaped Raven's lips. "Foolish and right often look the same out here." She studied the woman before her, frightened but determined, clearly out of her element but refusing to back down. "You understand that if what you're saying is true, you're talking about going up against the most powerful people in what's left of the world?" Talia nodded. "I understand. But I can't go back to living in comfort while knowing what I know. Will you help me?" The storm raged outside as Raven considered. Every survival instinct she'd developed screamed at her to abandon this woman and her dangerous truth. But she thought of all the communities she'd seen destroyed, all the lives lost to these natural disasters. "I must be losing my mind," Raven muttered. "All right, I'll help you. But first, we need to get somewhere safe. There's a settlement 3 days' drive from here, people I trust. If we make it there alive, we can start planning how to expose your dome leaders for what they really are. Talia's relief was palpable. Thank you. I promise you won't regret this. Don't make promises you can't keep, Dome Girl, Raven replied, but there was a hint of warmth in her voice. Get some rest. When this storm passes, we've got a long and dangerous road ahead of us. As Talia drifted into an uneasy sleep, Raven kept watch, her mind racing with the implications of what she'd learned. She'd thought she'd left behind any cause worth fighting for. Now, watching the strange woman who'd brought both danger and purpose back into her life, she wondered if fate had other plans. Dawn broke over the wasteland in shades of toxic amber, casting long shadows through the ruins. Raven watched as Talia attempted to start a fire with trembling hands, her aristocratic fingers unused to such basic survival tasks. After several failed attempts, Raven knelt beside her, gently correcting her technique. Like this, she demonstrated, striking the flint at the correct angle. You have to be patient but decisive. The sparks caught, and a small flame bloomed in the kindling. Talia's face lit up with disproportionate pride at the simple achievement, and Raven found herself fighting back a smile. The things they don't teach you in the domes, Talia mused, warming her hands by the fire. We're taught that the wasteland is nothing but savagery and chaos. But there's so much knowledge out here, isn't there? Real survival skills, not just theoretical learning. Survival has a way of cutting through the theoretical, Raven replied, checking their supplies. Speaking of which, we need to talk about your evidence. Those storms you mentioned, I need to know everything. Talia's expression darkened. She activated her bracelet's holographic display again, this time projecting a series of complex weather patterns and chemical formulas. The dome leadership calls it Project Cleanse. They've developed a way to seed the clouds with radioactive particles, controlling the storm's intensity and direction. They target settlements they consider. She swallowed hard, redundant to their vision of humanity's future. Their vision? Raven's voice was dangerously quiet. A carefully controlled population, all living under dome protection, but only those they deem worthy. The rest. Talia's voice trailed off. I found out because my father, he's one of the project leaders. When I confronted him, he tried to justify it. Called it necessary population management. That's when I knew I had to run. Before Raven could respond, a distant rumble caught her attention. She was on her feet instantly, scanning the horizon. We've got company. 3 vehicles, coming in fast. She grabbed her binoculars, cursing as she made out the insignia on the approaching vehicles. Dome security. Your father's people? Talia's face went pale. They found me. But how? Her eyes widened in horror as she looked at her bracelet. The tracking beacon. I disabled it, but they must have found a way to reactivate it remotely. Then we leave it behind, Raven said, already moving to gather their essential supplies. I can't, Talia protested. The evidence is encrypted in its memory core. Without it, we have no proof. Raven muttered something unflattering about dome technology as she tossed their supplies into the rover. Then we run. Get in. They peeled out just as the security vehicles crested the nearest hill. Raven's rover was older but modified for wasteland survival, and she knew these ruins better than any dome dweller. She took them down narrow alleys and through half-collapsed buildings, using every trick she'd learned in 5 years of survival. They're still gaining, Talia warned, watching the pursuit in the rearview mirror. Hold on, Raven growled. She yanked the wheel hard, sending them plunging into what appeared to be a solid wall of debris. At the last second, a hidden passage revealed itself, a service tunnel she'd discovered months ago. The security vehicles shot past their hiding spot, their sleek designs useless in navigating the wasteland's secrets. They sat in tense silence for several minutes, listening to the sounds of their pursuers growing distant. Finally, Raven let out a long breath. We need to get that bracelet off you. Even if we keep running, they'll just keep tracking us. I know, Talia said quietly. But the encryption. I designed it myself. It's tied to my biological signatures. If we remove the bracelet incorrectly, it'll destroy all the data. Raven studied her companion thoughtfully. This woman had given up everything, her home, her family, her entire way of life, to expose the truth. It would have been easier to stay silent, to keep living in comfort while others died. That took a different kind of strength than wasteland survival. There's someone who might be able to help, Raven said finally. An old friend who specializes in dome tech. She lives in the settlement we're heading to. But Talia. She turned to face her companion fully. I need to know I can trust you. No more half-truths. Who are you really? Talia met her gaze, and for a moment, Raven saw something like fear flicker in those violet eyes. Then she squared her shoulders. My real name is Talia Winters. My father isn't just a project leader, he's High Chancellor Winters. The head of the entire dome network. The silence that followed was deafening. Raven's hand instinctively moved to her weapon, but she stopped herself. After a long moment, she spoke, her voice carefully controlled. The High Chancellor's daughter. Running from the domes with enough evidence to bring down the entire power structure. No wonder they're hunting us so hard. I understand if this changes things, Talia said softly. If you want to leave me dash. And miss the chance to spite the people who've been trying to kill us all? Raven interrupted. Not likely. She started the rover's engine. But when this is over, you and I are going to have a long talk about full disclosure. As they drove deeper into the wasteland, both women were lost in thought. Raven wondered if she was making a terrible mistake, risking everything for this dome dweller with dangerous secrets. But when she glanced at Talia, she saw something in her expression, determination, guilt, and something else she couldn't quite name, that made her think perhaps some risks were worth taking. The settlement of Haven rose from the wasteland like a patchwork miracle, its walls cobbled together from salvaged metal and determination. Raven felt some of the tension leave her shoulders as they approached. If anywhere in the wasteland was safe, it was here. Your friend lives here? Talia asked, taking in the makeshift structures and the people moving purposefully about their daily tasks. Despite the harsh environment, there was an undeniable sense of community. Sage, Raven confirmed, navigating through the settlement's outer defenses. Best tech specialist in the wastes. If anyone can crack your bracelet's encryption without destroying the data, it's her. They parked the rover near a structure that looked like it had once been part of a cargo plane. Before they could exit, Raven grabbed Talia's arm. Listen, these people trust me. Don't make me regret bringing you here. Talia covered Raven's hand with her own. I won't. I promise. The moment was interrupted by a sharp knock on the rover's window. A tall woman with dark skin and intricate cybernetic augmentations around her left eye stood there, grinning. When you're done having a moment, some of us would like to say hello. Sage, Raven smiled, climbing out to embrace her friend. Still as subtle as ever. Subtlety's overrated, Sage winked, then turned her piercing gaze on Talia. And who's your dome-dwelling friend? That's a long story, Raven said carefully. One we need to discuss in private. Sage's cybernetic eye whirred as it focused on Talia's bracelet. I bet we do. Come on, my workshop's secure. Inside the workshop, surrounded by salvaged tech and humming machines, they explained everything, the artificial storms, the targeted destruction of settlements, and Talia's true identity. Sage listened without interrupting, her expression growing darker with each revelation. So, she said when they finished, you're telling me the High Chancellor's daughter is sitting in my workshop, wearing a bracelet full of evidence that could bring down the dome leadership, and you want me to crack it without triggering its security measures? That's about it, Raven nodded. Impossible job, tight deadline, guaranteed death if we fail? Sage grinned. Just another Tuesday in the wasteland. Let me see that bracelet. Hours passed as Sage worked, her augmented eye scanning layer after layer of security protocols. Raven and Talia waited tensely, knowing that every minute increased their risk of discovery. Finally, Sage sat back with a satisfied sigh. Good news and bad news, she announced. Good news, I can bypass the security and extract the data. Bad news, it'll take time, and... She hesitated, there's something else you should see. She projected a holographic display showing a map of the wasteland. Red dots appeared, marking settlements. I found this in the bracelet's secondary memory. It's a targeting schedule for the next wave of storms. And Haven. She pointed to their location, marked in pulsing red, were next on the list. The storm scheduled to hit in less than 48 hours. Raven's blood ran cold. She turned to Talia, whose face had gone pale. Did you know about this? No. I swear, I had no idea they were targeting Haven. Talia's eyes were wide with horror. You have to believe me. Like we believed you about everything else? Raven's voice was deadly quiet. What other secrets are you keeping, Your Highness? None. Raven, please. Talia reached for her, but Raven stepped back. I trusted you. Brought you to my people. And now they're all marked for death. Which is exactly why we need to focus, Sage interrupted sharply. You can sort out your trust issues later. Right now, we need to evacuate the settlement and find a way to stop that storm. Raven forced herself to think past the anger and betrayal churning in her gut. How long will it take to extract the data? 24 hours, minimum, Sage replied. And we'll need a powerful transmission array to broadcast it to all the settlements and domes simultaneously. The only one strong enough is in the old communication center, about 6 hours from here. Through Raider territory, Raven added grimly. Because this wasn't complicated enough already. I can help, Talia said quietly. The bracelet, it doesn't just track storms. It can influence them too. If I can access the control systems, I might be able to redirect this one. Raven studied her for a long moment. Part of her wanted to throw Talia out into the wasteland, let her face the consequences of her father's actions. But looking into those violet eyes, she saw genuine anguish and determination. If you're lying to me again. I'm not, Talia interrupted. I've lost everything else, Raven. Don't let me lose your trust too. Please. Something in her voice made Raven's resolve waver. Fine. Sage, start the data extraction. I'll organize the evacuation. Talia. She sighed, show me how to redirect a storm. As they worked through the night, preparing for both evacuation and resistance, Raven found herself watching Talia. Despite everything, there was something compelling about her determination to make things right, to fight against her own people for the sake of strangers. Why did you really run? Raven asked quietly during a rare moment alone. The whole truth this time. Talia was silent for a long moment. Because I fell in love with the enemy, she finally said, not meeting Raven's eyes. Not with a person, but with the idea of freedom. Of living honestly, no matter how harsh the truth might be. The domes, they're beautiful prisons, built on lies and murder. I couldn't be part of that anymore. She finally looked up. And then I met you, and I understood what real strength looks like. Before Raven could respond, alarms began blaring throughout Haven. Sage burst into the room, her cybernetic eye glowing urgently. We've got incoming. Multiple vehicles, heavy weapons. And... She looked at Talia, your father's leading them. The ground trembled as armored vehicles surrounded Haven's walls. Raven watched from the settlement's highest vantage point as elegant dome technology merged with wasteland brutality, sleek assault vehicles bristling with weapons, all aimed at the home she'd helped build. "They're not just here for me," Talia said, her voice tight with anger as she studied the approaching forces through borrowed binoculars. "This is a cleansing operation. They're planning to trigger the storm early. Can you stop them?" Raven asked, not taking her eyes off the vehicles. "Maybe. But I'll need to get closer to interface with their control systems." Talia lowered the binoculars, her face set with determination. "I should go out there. Talk to my father. Buy you time to evacuate everyone." "Absolutely not," Raven grabbed her arm. "He'll either kill you or use you as leverage against us. We need another way." Sage's voice crackled over their communicators. "I might have one. The data extraction's at 70%, but I found something interesting. The storm control systems have a fatal flaw. If we can overload them with conflicting commands, it might create a feedback loop that would destroy their ability to control the storms completely." "And how exactly do we do that?" Raven asked. "We need to get Talia's bracelet within range of their main control vehicle. The competing signals should trigger the overload, but..." Sage hesitated. "Someone would have to get close enough to initiate it." "Very close." A massive holographic image flickered to life above the approaching forces, High Chancellor Winters himself, his aristocratic features twisted with cold fury. "Talia," his voice boomed across the settlement. "You've caused quite enough trouble. Come out now, and perhaps we can discuss this reasonably. Continue this foolish rebellion, and..." Energy coursed through the vehicles, their weapons charging, "will be forced to take more decisive action." "He's stalling," Talia said quietly. "The storm systems are probably already charging. We have to move now." Raven nodded sharply. "Sage, get everyone to the emergency bunkers. Start transferring the data to portable drives. If we fail, at least the truth gets out." She turned to Talia. "You said the bracelet can influence storms. How much control do you actually have?" "Enough to create a distraction, maybe redirect some of the energy. But not enough to stop it completely. It'll have to do. Here's the plan: you create chaos in their ranks with a targeted storm burst. I'll use the confusion to get close to their control vehicle with a copy of your bracelet signal. Between the two disruptions, we might be able to overload their entire system." "That's suicide," Talia protested. "The feedback alone could kill you, never mind their weapons." "Then I better not die," Raven said with a grim smile. She started to turn away, but Talia caught her hand. "Raven, wait. About what I said before, about falling in love with freedom." She took a deep breath. "That wasn't the whole truth either. I also fell in love with Dash." "Tell me when this is over," Raven interrupted softly. "Give me something to come back for." The next few minutes were a blur of preparation. Sage worked frantically to copy the bracelet signal while Haven's defenders moved into position. Through it all, the High Chancellor's forces waited with predatory patience, knowing they held all the advantages. Finally, everything was ready. Raven looked at Talia, who had taken position on Haven's highest platform. Their eyes met, and 1,000 unspoken words passed between them. "Now!" Raven commanded. Talia raised her bracelet, and the sky erupted. A focused burst of storm energy descended on the dome forces, scattering their neat formations. Lightning struck with surgical precision, creating chaos in their ranks. In the confusion, Raven moved like a shadow through the battlefield. She was halfway to the control vehicle when everything went wrong. A stray bolt of energy illuminated her position, and suddenly she was caught in the crossfire. A blast caught her in the leg, sending her sprawling behind a piece of wreckage. "Raven!" Talia's scream carried over the communicator. "I'm coming down there." Stay in position. Raven gritted through the pain. We only get one shot at this. Actually, a cold voice said from behind her, you don't get any shots at all. Raven turned to find herself facing High Chancellor Winters himself, flanked by armed guards. Up close, his resemblance to Talia was striking. They had the same silver hair and violet eyes, but where hers held warmth and determination, his were chips of frozen amethyst. I must admit, he said conversationally, you wasteland dwellers have proven remarkably resilient. Like cockroaches, really. But evolution demands advancement, and your kind. He gestured at the settlement, are simply holding humanity back. Father. Talia's voice rang out. She stood atop a nearby structure, her bracelet glowing with barely contained energy. Step away from her, or I swear I'll bring down everything you've built. The High Chancellor smiled indulgently. My dear, you never did understand the true scope of our work. These storms, the cleansings, they're all part of a greater purpose. Humanity's ascension requires sacrifice. The only thing being sacrificed is your humanity, Talia replied. Her bracelet pulsed, and the sky above them began to swirl with unnatural energy. You would risk everything for these savages? For this? He looked at Raven with disgust, wasteland rat? No, father, Talia's voice was steel. I risk everything because it's right. Because love is stronger than your twisted vision of progress. And because... She smiled suddenly, you really should have been paying attention to what else was happening while we talked. On cue, Sage's voice cut through all their communicators, data extraction complete. Transmission beginning in 3, 2, 1. The sky above Haven erupted into chaos as Sage's transmission began. Every screen, every communications device in both the wasteland and the dome suddenly displayed the truth, detailed records of the artificial storms, the deliberate targeting of settlements, and the cold calculations behind each massacre. High Chancellor Winters' face contorted with rage as he watched his carefully constructed world begin to crumble. Kill the transmission, he barked into his communicator. Shut it down now. Too late, Raven said through gritted teeth, fighting to stand despite her injured leg. The truth's out there. No more lies, no more hiding behind your walls while others suffer. Then we'll simply have to make an example of this settlement, he snarled, raising his hand to signal his forces. Sometimes the old ways are best. Initiate the storm sequence. Maximum power. The air crackled with deadly energy as the storm control systems activated. But something was wrong. The swirling clouds above didn't respond with their usual artificial precision. Instead, they writhed and twisted, as if fighting against themselves. What have you done? The High Chancellor demanded, turning to Talia. She smiled, her bracelet pulsing with energy. Did you really think I spent all those years studying the storm systems without learning how they truly worked? Every override, every failsafe. Her eyes met Raven's. Now. Raven slammed her copied signal device into the ground. At the same instant, Talia unleashed the full power of her bracelet. The competing signals collided in a spectacular display of energy, creating a feedback loop that raced through the entire storm control network. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The High Chancellor's vehicles began to spark and smoke as their control systems overloaded. The artificial storm above them spun wildly out of control, but instead of descending on Haven, it turned back toward its creators. You fool, the High Chancellor shouted as his forces began to retreat. You'll destroy everything. No, father, Talia said quietly. I'm saving everything. Sage, activate the Haven shields. Energy barriers flickered to life around the settlement, crude but effective protection cobbled together from salvaged dome technology. As the storm raged above them, Haven stood protected while the High Chancellor's forces scattered in panic. This isn't over, he warned, backing away. The domes will never accept this chaos. Maybe they shouldn't, Talia replied. Maybe it's time for all of us to learn to live in the real world, not hiding behind walls of privilege and prejudice. A massive explosion lit up the sky as the main storm control systems finally overloaded completely. The artificial storm began to dissipate, its unnatural energy breaking apart into harmless particles. Years of careful control and manipulation ended in a spectacular display of failure. Raven limped to Talia's side as Haven's defenders moved to secure the area. Sage confirms the transmission reached everyone, the domes, the settlements, everyone. No one can deny the truth now. Talia nodded, watching as her father was taken into custody by his own shocked troops, who had seen the evidence of his crimes. It's going to be chaos for a while. The domes, the wasteland, everything's going to change. Change can be good, Raven said softly. You taught me that. She turned to face Talia fully. Now, I believe you were in the middle of telling me something before all this started? Talia laughed, a sound of pure relief and joy. I was saying that I fell in love. Not just with freedom, but with a stubborn, brave, beautiful wasteland survivor who taught me what real strength looks like. Funny, Raven smiled, pulling her close. I fell in love too. With a dome dweller of all people. One who gave up everything to do what was right. Their kiss was interrupted by Sage's amused voice over the communicator. Not to break up the moment, but we've got wounded to tend to, prisoners to process, and about 1,000 messages coming in from settlements and domes alike. The world's waking up, and they're all looking to Haven for answers. Back to work then, Raven sighed, but she kept hold of Talia's hand. Ready to help build something new? Talia looked out over Haven, where dome dwellers and wasteland survivors were already working together to tend to the injured and repair the damage. In the distance, the sun was rising over the wasteland, its light somehow cleaner and brighter than before. Together, she said firmly. Whatever comes next, we face it together. The storm that had brought them together had passed, but its effects would ripple out across their world forever. In its wake, it left not destruction, but possibility, the chance to bridge the divide between dome and wasteland, to heal old wounds, and to build a future where no one had to hide behind walls or survive in the shadows. As Haven's people began the work of reconstruction, Raven and Talia moved among them, their unlikely love story becoming just one of many threads in the new tapestry they were all weaving together. The wasteland still held dangers, and the path ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in generations, there was real hope. The final storm had cleared the air, and in its wake, humanity could finally begin to heal.